I thank you for who you are. I think about this year and how at Advent we have an expectation, not just longing for the light that comes with spring, but Lord, that you would be the light in our life. That you would show us who you are. Would you transform us and change us? Would we ultimately long for you to fulfill us and satisfy us? Amen. See, I love the Christmas story. I don't mean the Christmas story of Santa Claus and reindeer or the Grinch or Frosty the Snowman. I love the Christmas story that's just so simple. It's the story of the Nativity. Simple story. For me, it never gets old. I never get tired of reading it. I never get tired of hearing it. I never get tired of teaching about it. A couple years ago, I moved into Kelowna. We had some neighbors over, and my daughter was playing, I don't know if you have kids, but my daughter's playing with the nativity set, right? And so if you come to my house and you see it, like there's a donkey that has a broken leg, it's because of Evie, okay? She broke the donkey's leg. And so my daughter is playing with this little nativity set, and she bring in like dinosaurs and different things, right, as kids do. And this little girl, my daughter's friend, came up and goes, "What is this?" And I remember just being like, oh, here we go. I'm just gonna listen to this conversation, like just see what's gonna happen. And my daughter's like, "Don't you know?" And she goes, "No, what?" And she goes, "Do you know who this baby is?" So my daughter says, right? Like her 5-year-old, 6-year-old voice. And she goes, "I have no idea." And Evie's like, "It's Jesus. Jesus was born to change the world." And I was like, so simple, and yet I think about our world, how many people don't know a simple story about what Christmas is about. See, maybe you've heard this story for the first time this year, or maybe it's the 100th time. But for me, it brings up thoughts every year. See, the Christmas story, when you look at it, goes way back before Mary and Joseph, before Bethlehem, before the shepherds, before the wise men, before the mention of Christ. You look at John's Gospel in chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and all things were created through him. Apart from him, nothing, not one thing was created that has been created. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, and yet the darkness did not overcome it." Like, what do you do with the darker days? Like, when you think about that, my kids just recently said to me, "Dad, it feels like it's dark at like 4 o'clock. Because it does. Right? That's why people struggle with seasonal depression, because the darker days are just not getting that vitamin D. Like, what are you doing with the darkness? I think a lot of times we brighten it up with lights. We light lights up all around our house, our neighborhoods, our city. The lights are symbolic reminders that we're looking for the light. We'll look at 3 things today as we talk about the Christmas story. Is that 1, God was at the beginning, but there was darkness there, but there was light. In Genesis chapter 1, if you go back to the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, and God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was an evening, and there was a morning one day." See, in other words, when the world began, God was there. Because God, according to the Bible, he's the only one thing, one object that has no beginning. Because God has no beginning. Therefore, everything exists, can be grounded in God, find its origin, its beginning, its being in God. If you don't believe in God, you don't believe that God created everything, What do you live for? You ever wondered that? If you don't believe that God created everything, that he existed before everything, what do you and I live for? When you search for purpose and meaning and significance, how do you find it? How do you look for it? And ultimately, I think Christmas shows us what we look for. Christmas shows me how I look to fulfill the darkness in this time of year. Like, you might not be aware of it, but a couple of days ago on Friday, it's like the national consumer holiday called Black Friday, which really is a day where every single person that every company you've signed up for an email, emails you, right? Like, they're like, there's a crazy deal. Please come to our store online or in person. But I think for a lot of us, the way we try to deal with the darkness in our life, the way we deal with the fact that God has created everything and created us for a purpose, is that we actually look to fulfill ourselves with anything but him. Maybe it's consumerism. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's your career. We're always looking to fulfill ourselves. A couple of years ago, I share a story a little once in a while, but at an Amazon guy that knew me by name, right? And this guy shows up and he's like, "Hey, Kolby." And I remember that Christmas, I'm like, I think I might have a problem with Amazon. Because don't you think, like, when you get that thing in the mail and you're like, ooh, like this one little thing will maybe hack my life to make it even better. The foam roller will stretch my back out. That will really make my life feel so much better. But the problem is when you get that thing, I just put it away in my closet and never use it. And I'm like, oh, maybe the next thing will do it. And the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. See, when you search for meaning, where do you look for it? This Christmas, where do you look for significance and meaning? That's what I want us to ask, is where do we search for belonging? I like where Augustine says, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in God. That is true about me. That anytime I put my heart or my purpose in something, I just feel like so unsatisfied. C.S. Lewis, my favorite author, wrote this quote. It says here, God made us. He invented us as a man invents an engine. The car is made to run on petrol. It would not run properly on anything else. Now God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to burn, or the food our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. This is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about religion. God cannot give us a happiness, a peace apart from himself because it is not there. What a great quote at Christmas. Like, have you ever put wrong fuel in your gas tank? I have a friend who did that once, right? He had a gas car and they bought a diesel truck and they put gas in the diesel engine. I have a friend who actually accidentally put diesel in a gas engine, right? Like, I've almost been there. Right? When you're just like so routinely just like pumping gas and you're like, I remember one time, I went from like regular to Supreme, which I only do fill up my gas tank with that. But I'm like, oh, they swapped it out. And that's why. But routinely, I'm just always going from left to put in my gas tank, not right. Right? But just as simple as putting the wrong gas in your gas tank. And here's what happens if you do this. This is right up. I like how it talks about if you put the wrong fuel in your tank. Here's what it says. Whether diesel or gasoline is poured in the wrong tank, here's what happens. Your vehicle's fuel is now poisonous to its engine, and the entire engine and fuel system is at risk of contamination. It says professional attention is required to flush out and remove toxins. If you put the wrong gas in your car, you're in trouble. But don't we do this at Christmas? Like, don't we put the wrong fuel in? Like, well, maybe if I just make this Christmas experience amazing for my family, if I just, we don't fight this Christmas. If we just buy the right gift, I remember I have a friend of mine who always wanted to buy the best gift for her husband, but she had a husband that was impossible to buy for. And every time she bought the right gift, but it was in the wrong size or the wrong color, and there's so much expectation. And she just felt like, oh, I just wrecked all of Christmas because my husband, he didn't get the right thing. And he's like, I'll just return it a week later. But she's like, but I wrecked Christmas. Like, don't we feel like that sometimes? We're putting the wrong fuel in. If I just make this perfect, if I just make the meal the most miraculous meal of all time, the turkey's perfect, the wine is exquisite, the stuffing's perfect. See, isn't it fitting for us, the darkest time of year is Christmas, that it's a season where we have so much, but so often we feel like we have nothing. Do you ever wonder why that is? I think it shows us that we're trying to fulfill ourselves with external things. External things. I just read an article recently about how at Christmas this year, because we're kind of entering into kind of an economic recession, that people are spending less money. They're looking for better deals. But I think so often that people, how they deal with Christmas, how they deal with the problem of darkness in our life and in our world, shows how we spend our money, how we spend our time, how we spend our talents. I read another article that talked about how the shared meaning of Christmas, this famous New York Times article said, is that love will triumph, that we'll be able to put a world of unity and peace together. I don't know, do you feel like that this year? Do you feel like, at Christmas, love will triumph and that we'll be able to put together a world of unity and peace? Like, really what this article is trying to boil down is that we have light inside of us. We just have to search for it and find it. That you actually can find unity and peace and light inside of yourself. Do you feel like that? When you look at the problem of our world, you'd say, well, maybe the problem of our world is education. If we just educate people better, then we'd have unity and peace and love would triumph. But we are the most educated society in the world. That people would long to have the information we have. That you guys have computers in your pockets that I dreamt about 15 years ago. Remember those days when you're at home on a computer, it's dial-up, right? And my parents' living room, and I'm trying to download a song that took literally a whole night. We have so much education and technology. And you look at the darkness in our world. Maybe say it's money. We have the most amount of money in history. We are exponentially rich. If you go and look on a website called the Global Rich List, and you put in your salary, guaranteed you're in the top 1% of the world. Because the most of the world live on less than $1 a day. And here we are. I'm buying whatever I want on Black Friday. Trying to make the Christmas the most magical thing ever for my children. See, I saw someone on Twitter just recently said, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, they said, Elon, what a waste of money. If you just gave that $44 billion and just divided it by every person on earth, they'd say we'd get I think someone said some stupid math on how much we each get. And he goes, well, can I just see how much you give to a charity right now? If I gave you $1 million, would you give any of that money away or you just keep it to yourself? You see, maybe we said the problem of the world, the problem with the light, the lack of light in the world, the problem with the darkness in our world is because we're uneducated, we don't have enough money. I think we're so educated, we have so much money. But the problem is that we're looking for the light somewhere in places that we shouldn't be looking for light. This year at Christmas, I always realize when the season gets darker, that my kids, when they go to bed, they wake up in the middle of the night and they're banging into things. Because usually the house is lighter than what it is. My kids are like, Dad, I need a flashlight in my bedroom. I'm like, what? I need a nightlight. Dad, get me a nightlight. Leave the bathroom door light on. Okay, I'll leave the light on for the bathroom. Okay, like leave the door open, a little crack in the bathroom, Dad, please. Like think about your house. If it's completely dark, if you couldn't see anything, you're fumbling around, trying to find the light, trying to fix it. But I think ultimately we want to be free. We want freedom. And God says this, that he made you. And when you realize that, you realize that you're created to know the light. That Jesus is the light of life. There's a couple ways to know the light. One way is you read the scripture. You read the Bible. It tells you that God made human beings. He made you and I. The Bible is made for us to read it, to obey it, to study it, to memorize it, to meditate on it. But also, God created you with a calling. That God has given you and I certain gifts, and he wants you to use those things. It's not the sort of things you come to yourself by just reading the Bible, that you have to actually be in community. There's people in my community group, I love it so much, where I just get to see people come and flourish in new ways. That in a friendship, that not only does that one person flourish, but all the friendships flourish because of that one connection. See, God created us for him, but he also created us for other people. He created us to know him personally, to have a prayer life, to have deep community, where people can see you at your best and at your worst. Because in the beginning, there was God. But how do you deal with the darkness? I love in this passage in Genesis, it says that the earth was formless and empty. So there was shapelessness and chaos. And darkness was over the surface of the deep. I love in the Old King James Version, I bet Bill knows this. It says darkness was upon the face of the deep. I love that. See, what does that mean? It means our world naturally has darkness built into it. Here's how our world's so dark, so broken. In the Bible, the word darkness really refers to chaos, evil, and ignorance. It means the world is filled with evil and untold suffering. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, darkness covered it all. But when God speaks under his word, the darkness and the chaos dispels, and there's orderliness and light. See, there's chaos and darkness, but when God speaks, do you see that? When he's hovering over it, he speaks that there's actually light. Changes things. I look at our lives. At Christmas, we are remembered of the darkness. There's a promise that in the moments of your darkness, that God's hovering over, speaking life into it, if you choose to follow him. See, when God speaks, when things come under his word, things change. See, we look at Exodus. You go to the story of Moses coming out of Egypt. Moses comes to Pharaoh, and he's trying to get the children of Israel out of bondage and slavery. He goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, I will not do it. So what does he do? God brings to smite Egypt with plagues. See, you always wonder, like, how come Pharaoh was so difficult? Why was he so stubborn? Why was he so, couldn't he just understand? But it says his heart was hardened. But commentators, as I was reading this past week, realized that God was showing us, as well as he's trying to show Pharaoh, is that sin unleashes the forces of chaos and darkness because sin violates the very fabric of your being and unravels God's creation. See, what you really have here in Exodus chapter 5 to 10, go and read it later, is you have these plagues that are really unraveling of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. The second to last plague near the very end, suddenly there's darkness over the face of the whole land. It's really just almost like God is just unraveling creation. He's showing that their sin is destroying creation. Their sin is actually destroying the very fabric he made. You see, if you and I go to a doctor, which I hope you go to doctors once in a while, okay? You go to a doctor, and your doctor says to you, like, you know what? You're in trouble. Don't eat as high cholesterol as you are. And you do it. You just are like, forget that. I'm just going to eat this, whatever I want to eat. Right? It doesn't put you in jail. Someone doesn't like come over and say, Kolby, stop eating that way. You know what happens over time? I get a heart attack. Right? You're violating your own being. That there's consequences that are so natural, which means you're actually unleashing the forces of chaos and darkness in your own life. That you're actually violating the design of your own physical being, that you're actually going to have a heart attack if you're eating high cholesterol all the time. See, when God says, have no other gods before me, put me at the center of your life, what he's trying to say here is, I'm not going to strike you down with lightning. But I want you to follow me. I want you to reorganize your whole life around me. The message of Christianity is so different than our world. So often our world is like, you know what? You're going to fix yourself in the world around you if you just try hard enough. The branding, which is about $1.5 billion every year for Christmas, is a branding that if you buy this, you'll find happiness, you'll choose happiness. But the Christmas message isn't like that. The Christian Christmas message. It says maybe things are really hard, maybe things are really bad, that we can't save or heal ourselves. Things can be so dark, but nevertheless, there's hope in Jesus. That wherever you're at in your life right now, that if you center your life around God, that there will be light at the end of the tunnel. The Christmas message for us is that those who face the darkness, there's a God who's hovering over. There's a very intimate and warm imagery, language. They say that, commentators say that this is like a word that means a mother bird fluttering over her young. See, the light isn't inside you. It's not brought out by you. It's God. He's the light. But then what does the light do to us? What is the imagery of light in the New Testament? In the Old Testament, it's referring to the symbolic nature of light. So many commentators talked over and over and over again about sunlight. When you think about sunlight, what does sunlight bring into the world? It brings really three things. One is life. The second thing is truth. The third thing is beauty. See, if the sun went out, if it was totally spent, if the sun tomorrow is burned out, what would happen? We would freeze. See, in John chapter 1, verse 4, it says, in him was life. The life was the light of men. See, you and I exist because God is upholding us. That you and I, whether we like it or not, are borrowing your being from him. This is not just true of our physical body, but you're also your spirit and your soul. According to the Bible, that we have lost the original relationship with God that we had from the very beginning. And that's why we know and can see and taste sometimes physical death. That's why we feel spiritual death. That's why we experience the loss of meaning, loss of hope, loss of desires. But he's the only one who can light up our lives. He's the only one that will light up your life. He's the only one who will really bring life to the fullness it can possibly be. The second thing is truth. That sunlight brings out the truth. I was driving in my car recently, and I bought like a newer vehicle this past summer. It has this weird thing where it washes the headlights. Have you ever had that before? And so I'm pressing a button where I'm like washing my windshield. And for a moment, when it's washing my headlights, it feels like I'm like blacked out. I was like, that's scary. Like, what if I had no headlights? Like, what if you drove your car and you had like one headlight burn out and you're like me, when I had one headlight burn out, I'm like, okay, God, please don't let the other one burn out. Because how am I going to get home with my high beams on, right? Like, if you drove without headlights, that'd be terrible. You'd be able to see the road. You'd be lost. You see, I think for us, the light reveals the truth about things. The light reveals how lost we are, how we often look for a light to guide us. The Bible says in 1 John 5 and 6 that we're actually searching for the source of all truth. See, on one level, the only reason you can know anything is because of God. It's because he made your mind. I love that we can explore space. I love SpaceX. I love that they're like shooting off rockets all the time. But you know what the most amazing thing to me is that we can explore space and yet we still don't know the depths of the human mind. That God created you. He created your brain. And we can know things because of God. But Jesus said, let the light be your path. Like, how do you show the truth of Christmas this year? How do you show the truth of who he is in a dark and broken world? How do you find light? How do your neighbors search for light? How do your family members search for light? You know how we often do is we just medicate it. We just numb it so we don't feel anything. But this Christmas, let the light reveal the truth about who you are, but also who God created you to become. The third thing, I'll bring Levi back up to finish this up, is beauty. I love at Christmas, the lights are so beautiful. Lights hung on houses, trees, businesses. It's so incredibly dazzling that my kids, when we go to H2O at night, just like, we'll sit in the back seat, being like, Dad, I love those lights. I love those lights. I love those lights. I just feel like for us so often, the sunlight brings so much beauty into our world, but also the light brings so much beauty into our world. Doesn't it give you just joy to drive down Harvey at Christmas, not like on a Friday or Saturday, but like on maybe a Thursday at night, and you see the Tree of Life at the landmark buildings, and you're like, wow, that's incredible. To drive down Candy Cane Lane, to see the house on Fitzpatrick and be like, wow, I can't believe somebody built this and created this. There's a lot of joy at Christmas, but also a lot of struggle. That people struggle with depression because there's a lack of light. It shows so often we actually need physical light because light brings us joy. God is the source of all beauty and joy. Like Augustine famously stated this, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. That Augustine believed that when you put your joy in anything else but Jesus, you will find a joy robber this Christmas. The source of joy this Christmas can't be your spouse or gifts or career. That all joy is ultimately found in knowing who you are and who God created you to become, to be in relationship with him. Anything else is just counterfeit. It looks real, maybe feels real, but deep down, you get that emptiness feeling again and again and again. It shows us. The mall on Friday showed me, reminded me that I'm searching for something. See, how do you find truth and life and beauty in the darkness? I love in Matthew chapter 27. It says, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, darkness came over the land. In the 9th hour, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? At that moment, the earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs broke open and bodies of the people who had died were raised to life. See, what's going on there? Think of the plagues, the chaotic forces of disorderliness and unraveling, darkness and disintegration. They were all falling on Jesus. Look at Moses' rod. Here's the rod of injustice coming down on Jesus. Remember the Nile turning to blood. This is Jesus' blood and water flowing, mingled down. Remember the death of the firstborn. This is ultimately God's firstborn dying, saying, remember the darkness. Remember that even your darkest days, that there's like an uncreated, chaotic darkness of sin that's following on Jesus. See, Jesus was a creator, that nothing was made without him. And then we're reminded this year that Jesus is the maker who is willing to be unmade so that you and I could be remade. That's the beautiful thing about Christmas this year. In your darkness, in the darker days, you can find truth and beauty and life because Jesus, the maker, who's willing to be uncreated so that you and I could be recreated in his image. Just remember what you're searching for. Think about what you're searching for this Christmas and how ultimately you can find significance and joy in Jesus. A creator who loves you, who wants to hover and bring life to your light like no one else can. No gift can, no spouse can, no children can, no one can, because he's the maker who's willing to be unmade so you and I can be remade. Let's pray. Father, we are so aware of the days, the darkness, the light. Father, would you show us who you are? Show us this season that you're the light of life. That I don't know what people are facing here. Maybe it's the loss of so much. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. That there is a grind at Christmas, Lord, that I pray you would remind us how much you love us, that you're for us, that you experienced the chaos on the cross so we'd be set free. Jesus, so we could actually be remade. We could be shaped and formed by you. Would you bring life and truth and beauty into our life this Christmas? Amen.